January 26, 1945. 2:30 in the afternoon. The frozen forest near Holtzwihr, France, lay silent under a leaden sky. Snow covered everything, masking the scars of war beneath a deceptive blanket of white. Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy stood at the edge of a tree line, binoculars pressed to his face, watching something that made his blood run cold. Through the mist and snow, 6 German tanks emerged from the woods, Panzervorführer and tank destroyers, their dark hulls cutting through the white landscape like sharks through water. Behind them came infantry, not a platoon, not a company, hundreds of them, field grey uniforms blending into the winter forest. Murphy's company had been reduced to 19 men, 19 against a full German battalion. The radios were crackling with retreat orders. Officers were already pulling back to secondary positions. Everyone knew what was coming. This wasn't a skirmish. This was an annihilation. Behind Murphy, a burning M10 tank destroyer sat in the snow, flames curling from its engine compartment. It had taken a direct hit minutes earlier. The crew had bailed out and run. Standard procedure, sensible procedure. But Murphy wasn't looking at the flames. He was looking at the machine gun mounted on top, the .50 caliber Browning, still intact, still loaded. He turned to his men, his voice barely above a whisper. "Get to the woods, all of you, now. Sir, what about you?" Murphy didn't answer. He was already walking toward the burning tank destroyer, alone, into the snow. What he was about to do would be called impossible by military analysts, suicidal by his own commanders, and miraculous by the men who lived because of it. Audie Leon Murphy wasn't supposed to survive childhood, much less war. Born in 1925 in a Texas sharecropper's shack near Kingston, he was one of 12 children. His father abandoned the family when Audie was young. His mother died when he was 16. Poverty wasn't just a condition in Murphy's life, it was the entire landscape. He picked cotton for pennies, he hunted squirrels and rabbits to keep his siblings fed, using a borrowed rifle and becoming so accurate that he rarely wasted ammunition. By the time he was a teenager, Audie Murphy could shoot the eye out of a squirrel at 50 yards. Not because it was sport, but because it was survival. When his mother died, the children were scattered. Some went to orphanages, others to relatives. Audie, small, thin, barely 5'5", and 110 pounds, tried to enlist. The Marines rejected him. Too small. The paratroopers rejected him. Too short. Finally, the army took him, but only reluctantly. He arrived in North Africa in 1943, a baby-faced kid who looked more like a high school sophomore than a soldier. Other men assumed he'd wash out. His own officers doubted he'd make it through his first week of combat. They were wrong. In Sicily, Italy, and France, Murphy became something no one expected. A killer. Precise, cold, utterly fearless. He didn't charge into battle. Like some Hollywood hero, he moved like a hunter, calculated, patient, lethal. By January 1945, Murphy was a second lieutenant in Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. He'd been wounded twice, decorated multiple times. He'd killed so many enemy soldiers that he'd stopped counting, but he never stopped being that quiet, polite Texas boy who wrote letters home to his siblings and sent most of his pay back to support them. His men respected him because Murphy never asked them to do anything. He wouldn't do first. He led from the front. Always. And when officers made decisions that would get soldiers killed, Murphy pushed back, quietly, firmly. By late January 1945, the 3rd Infantry Division was pushing through the Colmar pocket in eastern France, trying to clear the last German forces west of the Rhine River. The weather was brutal, temperatures hovered below freezing, supplies were limited, casualties were mounting. And near the small village of Holtzwihr, the Germans were preparing one final desperate counterattack. The morning of January 26th started with bad intelligence. American command believed the Germans in the Holtzwihr sector were withdrawing, falling back across the Rhine. Company B was ordered to advance through open farmland and secure a wooded area northeast of the village. Murphy didn't like it. The terrain was too exposed, too flat. A perfect killing ground, but orders were orders. By midday, Company B had pushed forward to the edge of a forest, setting up defensive positions along a tree line that bordered frozen fields. That's when the attack began. 6 German tanks rolled out of the woods half a mile away, accompanied by approximately 250 infantry soldiers. The Germans had been waiting, watching, and now they were coming in force. Murphy immediately called for artillery support. The response crackled back through the radio. Artillery was available, but they needed coordinates. They needed someone to direct fire. Murphy grabbed the radio handset. He'd spot for them himself, but the situation deteriorated faster than anyone anticipated. The German armour wasn't just advancing, it was accompanied by infantry moving in squad tactics, using the tanks as mobile cover. American positions began taking direct fire. Men started falling. Murphy's company had 2 M10 tank destroyers in support. One took a direct hit within minutes, its turret blown clean off. The crew never had a chance. The second M10, positioned 30 yards behind Murphy's command post, took a glancing shot to the engine compartment. Fire erupted immediately. The crew bailed out, running for cover in the woods. Murphy watched them go. He didn't blame them. The ammunition inside could cook off any second. The whole thing could explode. Standard doctrine was clear: abandon burning vehicles immediately, but Murphy kept staring at that burning M10. At the Browning .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the turret ring. At the field of fire it commanded. At the Germans, now 200 yards away and closing. His company was being pushed back. Some men were already retreating into the woods. Others were pinned down, unable to move. The German infantry was coordinating their advance with frightening efficiency. In minutes, they'd overrun the American positions entirely. Murphy made his decision. He turned to his men and gave an order that shocked everyone who heard it. Fall back to the woods. Establish a defensive line. I'll cover you. Sir, how? Murphy was already moving, walking calmly through machine gun fire, through the snow, toward the burning tank destroyer. Smoke poured from the engine compartment. Flames licked at the hull. The metal was already hot enough to blister skin. He climbed onto the turret. The .50 cal was right there, ammunition belt still loaded. He grabbed the grips, swung the weapon toward the advancing Germans, and opened fire. The Browning M2 .50 caliber machine gun is a devastating weapon. It fires thumb-sized rounds at 500 rounds per minute, with effective range exceeding 1,800 yards. In the right hands, it can shred vehicles, punch through light armour, and cut down infantry like wheat before a scythe. Audie Murphy's hands were the right hands. The first burst caught a squad of German infantry in the open. Men fell. Others dove for cover. The Germans, expecting a rout, suddenly found themselves under accurate, withering fire from a weapon they thought had been abandoned. Murphy worked the gun with mechanical precision, short, controlled bursts, leading targets, adjusting for wind and distance. He'd spent years hunting game in Texas. This was the same principle, just different prey. The Germans returned fire. Bullets snapped past Murphy's head. Rounds clanged off the tank destroyer's armour. Snow kicked up around him in little geysers of white. But Murphy didn't flinch. He couldn't afford to. Below him, the tank destroyer continued to burn. Heat radiated up through the metal. The ammunition inside was cooking off, small explosions popping like firecrackers. Any second, the entire vehicle could detonate. Murphy knew it. The Germans knew it. Everyone watching knew it. But Murphy stayed. He kept firing. The machine gun grew hot in his hands, the barrel glowing faintly even in the afternoon light. He burned through one ammunition belt, then another. The Germans tried to flank him. Murphy swiveled the gun, cutting them down. They tried to rush him. He mowed them down before they covered 10 yards. Behind him, his company was withdrawing in good order now, establishing defensive positions in the woods. The Germans, fixated on the lone American on the burning tank, pressed their attack toward him instead of pursuing the retreating infantry. Murphy grabbed the radio handset he'd brought with him, still directing artillery fire, even while manning the machine gun. His voice was calm, almost conversational, calling out coordinates, adjusting fall of shot, all while firing burst after burst into the German formations. The artillery began landing. Shells exploded among the German infantry, creating chaos and confusion, but the enemy tanks kept coming, grinding forward through the snow. One of them, a Panzer IV, turned its turret toward Murphy. He saw it, saw the long barrel swinging in his direction, knew what was coming. The tank fired. The shell screamed past, missing by less than 3 feet. and detonated in the trees behind him. The concussion wave nearly knocked Murphy off the turret. He adjusted his grip and kept firing. The German infantry, brave as they were, began to falter. They'd expected easy victory. Instead, they were being torn apart by one man who refused to die, standing on a vehicle that could explode at any moment. For over an hour, Murphy held that position, alone, exposed, surrounded by smoke, fire, and incoming rounds. He fired every round of ammunition available on the tank destroyer, something close to 2,000 rounds. The bodies began to pile up in the snow, and then, finally, the Germans pulled back, not because they ran out of courage, but because they ran out of men willing to walk into that killing zone. The attack broke. The tanks withdrew. The infantry retreated into the woods. Murphy climbed down from the burning M10, his uniform smoking, his hands blistered, his face blackened with soot. He walked back to his company's position like a man returning from a casual errand. His men stared at him in disbelief. One sergeant finally found his voice. "Lieutenant, that tank could have blown up under you any second," Murphy shrugged, his voice quiet. "I know, but I figured they'd kill you before it got the chance to kill me." The medics descended on Murphy immediately. His hands were burned from the superheated machine gun. Shrapnel had torn small wounds in his leg. He was suffering from smoke inhalation, but he was alive. Against every logical expectation, he was alive. The battlefield told a different story. American patrols that swept the area after the engagement counted at least 50 German dead in the snow, most within 200 yards of the burning M10. Dozens more were wounded. Blood trails led back into the woods where the Germans had dragged casualties away. The counterattack had been completely shattered. A German battalion strength force, supported by armour, had been stopped cold by one man with a machine gun. Military analysts would later call it statistically improbable. Murphy's own company commander would describe it simply as the bravest thing I ever witnessed. But Murphy wasn't thinking about bravery. Lying in a field hospital that night, hands wrapped in bandages, he was thinking about the men he'd saved. 19 men who might have been overrun, captured, or killed if the Germans had broken through. The official investigation came quickly. Officers wanted to understand exactly what had happened. Murphy gave his report in his typical flat, understated manner. He'd seen the enemy advancing. He'd used available resources to delay them, nothing more. But his men told a different story. They described Murphy climbing onto a burning vehicle that could have exploded at any moment, standing there for over an hour, fully exposed, directing artillery and firing the machine gun simultaneously, never taking cover, never retreating. 7 months later, Audie Murphy would receive the Medal of Honor for his actions that day. The citation would describe his indomitable courage and refusal to give an inch of ground. It would become the most famous of his many decorations. But the medal ceremony was still months away. In January 1945, Murphy was just an exhausted lieutenant with burned hands, trying to write a letter to his sister back in Texas. He started 3 times, crossed out the words, and finally just wrote, "We had a rough day yesterday, but we're okay. Tell the kids I miss them." He never mentioned the tank, never mentioned the fire, never mentioned the Germans. Because to Audie Murphy, what he'd done wasn't heroism, it was necessity. It was the job. It was what you did when the people counting on you had nowhere else to go. Word of Murphy's stand spread through the 3rd Infantry Division like wildfire. Not through official channels, but through the whispered conversations of soldiers who needed something to believe in. In the brutal winter of 1945, with the war grinding toward its bloody conclusion, men needed to know that courage still mattered, that one soldier could still make a difference. Other units began requesting Murphy by name for difficult operations. His company became something of a legend within the division. New replacements would arrive and ask, wide-eyed, if it was true. Did Lieutenant Murphy really stand on a burning tank for an hour? The veterans would just nod. Yeah, he did. But for Murphy himself, the attention was uncomfortable. He wasn't looking for glory. He'd seen too much death, too much suffering. The Texas boy who'd started the war as a private now carried a weight that had nothing to do with rank or medals. It was the weight of all the men he couldn't save, the friends who died beside him, the soldiers he'd led into situations they didn't come back from. After the war, Murphy would struggle. The nightmares came almost nightly. The memories refused to fade. He'd wake up reaching for weapons that weren't there, fighting enemies that existed only in his mind. What we now call PTSD, Murphy called the things you can't forget. He became an actor, playing soldiers in Hollywood films, trying to make sense of what he'd lived through. He wrote a memoir, honest and unflinching, that became a bestseller. He advocated for veterans' mental health treatment decades before it became common practice. But on some level, Murphy never left that burning tank destroyer, never stopped being that 19-year-old kid standing alone in the snow, holding a line that shouldn't have held, fighting a battle that shouldn't have been won. The military studied his action at Holtzwihr for years. Tacticians analysed the fields of fire, the positioning, the decision-making. Some tried to quantify it: ammunition expenditure per enemy casualty, effective range of suppressive fire, psychological impact of sustained defensive positions. But no analysis could capture the essential truth. Murphy had done something that couldn't be taught in any manual. He'd looked at an impossible situation and decided that impossible just meant no one else had done it yet. Audie Murphy died in a plane crash in 1971 at the age of 45. He was flying through bad weather in Virginia, trying to reach a business meeting. The crash killed everyone aboard. He's buried in Arlington National Cemetery, his grave marked by a simple white stone that lists his decorations, including the Medal of Honor. Even now, more than 50 years after his death, his grave is one of the most visited in Arlington. People leave medals, flags, flowers, and handwritten notes. Many are from veterans of later wars, men and women who see something of themselves in Murphy's story, the soldier who did what needed to be done, who stood when others couldn't, who fought not for glory, but for the people beside him. Military training academies still teach Murphy's action at Holtzwihr, not as a tactical manual, but as a case study in leadership and courage under fire. The lesson isn't climb onto burning vehicles. The lesson is deeper. Know when the book doesn't have an answer. Know when to trust your instincts. Know what's worth dying for. But perhaps the most important part of Murphy's legacy isn't the medals or the movies or the memorials. It's something quieter. It's the letter a veteran wrote to Murphy's family decades after the war. The veteran had been one of the 19 men in Company B that day, pinned down in the woods, certain he was about to die. He wrote, "I didn't know Lieutenant Murphy well. He was quiet, kept to himself mostly. But when I saw him climb onto that burning tank, I understood something. I understood that some men are just built different. They see what needs to be done, and they do it, even when it costs them everything. I went home because of him. I met my wife, raised my kids, lived my life. All because one small man from Texas refused to let us die." That's the real story. Not the impossible heroics, though those were real. Not the decorations, though he earned every one. The real story is what happened after. The lives lived. The children born. The futures made possible because one soldier stood on a burning tank destroyer in the snow and decided that retreat wasn't an option. On January 26, 1945, near a frozen village in eastern France, Audie Murphy made a choice. It wasn't a complicated choice. It wasn't a calculated choice. It was simply the only choice he could live with. He saw his men in danger. He saw a weapon that could help them. And he saw a burning vehicle that everyone said would explode. The mathematics were simple, brutal, and clear. He could run and watch good men die, or he could climb onto that tank destroyer and buy them the time they needed to survive. Murphy chose the tank, he chose the fire, he chose to stand alone against impossible odds because standing was better than running. Because covering a retreat meant something. Because those 19 men deserved a chance. The tank destroyer never exploded. Murphy survived, the Germans retreated, and 19 American soldiers lived to see another day. Some of them lived to see the end of the war. Some lived to go home, to marry, to raise families, to grow old. All because a sharecropper's son from Texas, who barely weighed 110 pounds soaking wet, decided that fear was less important than duty. There are no perfect soldiers, no perfect heroes, just imperfect humans who, in moments of crisis, find something inside themselves they didn't know existed. Murphy found it on that burning tank. And for 1 hour, in the smoke and snow and fire, he became something more than human. He became hope. The war would end 4 months later. Murphy would come home. But a piece of him stayed there, standing on that turret, machine gun in hand, holding a line that couldn't be held, buying time that couldn't be bought, saving lives that shouldn't have been saved. And maybe that's the real lesson, that sometimes, when everything says to run, the bravest thing you can do is stand. Not because you're fearless, but because the people behind you deserve a chance to live. Audie Murphy gave them that chance, and in doing so, he gave us all something to remember, something to aspire to, something that whispers to us across the decades. When the moment comes, when everything is burning and the enemy is closing in, you'll know what to do. You'll stand, because that's what soldiers do. That's what heroes do. That's what one small man from Texas did on a frozen afternoon in France when the world was on fire and there was nowhere left to run. He stood, and because he stood, others lived. And that makes all the difference.